these direct all-in. We're worried that this might not be a crime so much as it is a cover-up in some circumstances as it relates to some people. And it is challenging constitutionally to deal with the fact that you may have had Department of Justice and FBI assets and informants really increasing the degree of criminality on this day. And who's supposed to look into them? Well, the Congress is. And there was likely a time, John, when I believed that the Republicans should disband this January 6th committee the moment we take power after the 2022 elections. But increasingly, I'm of the view that we have to convert it to a proper purpose to follow the facts in the law when the Department of Justice has not been forthcoming when members of Congress have asked questions under oath.
Mr. Gaetz, do you think there would have been no riot if there hadn't been federal officers somehow involved in the crowd?
That is the operative question, and if you note, I would point you to. Hold on. I would point to the video that we just showed. I would say take these videos and present them to the skeptics and show them Ray Epps at the moment of breach. There was no breach prior to the video that I showed you, that initial video, and so at the moment of breach, you have Epps instigating, pushing, directing, describing exactly what should happen. I think that the question you asked is the operative question, and unfortunately the January 6th committee seems to be focused on everything else.
You're saying the federal government caused the riot at the Capitol?
I do not believe that there would have been the same level of criminal acuity on January 6th of last year, but for the involvement of the federal government. I don't think there would have been a kidnapping plot of Governor Whitmer without the involvement of the federal government. And increasingly, we are starting to see pattern recognition, where the federal government inserts themselves into these organizations through assets, informants, at times possibly agents, and then those people become not spectators or witnesses to those events, but they become the very animators of those events. That seems to be precisely the evidence that I just showed you regarding Ray Epps. I'm sorry. Let's let everybody get one before we go back. Yes.
Just to zoom out on Arthur's question, your theory of the case is that Donald Trump actually won the election. The federal government organized a breach of the Capitol to disrupt the results being challenged on January 6th.
I think you've imputed a motive that I think we still have to investigate. Remember, what Congresswoman Greene and I are calling for is for Republicans to take power and utilize the January 6th committee to answer those questions as to motive. What I find very circumspect is in the face of this direct captured evidence, and when presented with direct questions under oath, we get obfuscation from the Attorney General and the FBI Director. That is very suspicious to us. We're not ready to try and convict anyone, but these are the operative questions, not whether or not there were coup plotters who wanted to formulate an argument for the floor of the House.
But you're a lawyer. That's your working theory of the case. That, as you said, you had these plans to offer up objections, and they all got disrupted because the federal government sent in.
There could be an alternate motive. The motive of the federal government may not have been to disrupt that debate, but to ensnare, target, and trash a political movement. We saw during the civil rights era the Department of Justice, the FBI, insert themselves into the people around civil rights leaders that they were concerned about, that they thought were agitators, that they thought were communists. And then we saw those actions of some of those federal assets increase suspicion and basis for investigation. During the Russia hoax, we saw, the FBI not as a victim of lying Russians, but actually seeding those lies to justify their own action. And you see that through the spoken indictments of Durham. So this wasn't a one-off on January 6th. As Congresswoman Greene laid out, and as I've just laid out, we believe there's a pattern and practice where assets, agents, and informants of the federal government are central to the criminal activity, and but for their involvement, that activity would have been at a minimum at a lower acuity. Yes. Sir.
What do you make of the fact that so few of the fellow Republicans are in D.C. today?
I can't answer for them. And I think it's important to let them answer that question themselves. Unfortunately, Republicans don't seem to want to go into the truth like Congressman Gaetz and I are. We will not stand here and be lied about, and that's what's happening. We're watching it all over the news today, and we've seen it for the past year. I'm not one that's going to just sit there and take and duck and hide under cover when the mainstream media and the Democrat Party wants to label people and tell tell lies about us. We're here because we want to get out in front and say we think there's real questions that do need to be asked. Another thing is I'll never answer for someone else's motive on what they did on January 6th because I have no idea. The only thing that we cared about and we're working on, again, was looking into election fraud, and we were objecting and had worked very hard on the state of Michigan on behalf of those people that had signed their names at risk of perjuring themselves over what they had said they'd seen election fraud. I think that's extremely important. So as far as anyone's motive, and we're not going to defend people that broke laws on January 6th. I certainly don't want to do that. I don't like any riots, and I don't care what they're for. What I want to know is, was our government involved, and why? Why on earth would they do that? And if so, there's something that needs to be done about it.
Yes, sir, in the back.
Now that so many audits and other checks have been done, do you acknowledge that Joe Biden won the election and is the legitimate president?
You want to know something? I've introduced 4 different sets of articles of impeachment. I think it's very clear that I think Joe Biden is the president. I mean, if I'm trying to impeach him, I think it's clear that I think he's the president. Yes, he was on January 6th. His electoral college votes were confirmed, and he was sworn in later on in January. I think that's a silly question to ask.
Yeah.
What do you think of President Biden's new direct tone today in his speech, putting blame directly on Mr. Trump for January 6th?
He didn't even say his name. When I blame people, I typically use their name, so I'd probably reject the premise of the question.
But following on from that metaphor that he used, that Donald Trump and his supporters by implication were holding a dagger to the throat of American democracy, what was your reaction to that?
Ludicrous. We are here to vindicate our democracy, to ensure that people in the national security apparatus don't delegitimize, target, abuse, and torture an entire political movement of tens of millions of Americans. I also don't think it was a particularly new tone. It sort of seemed like the normal speech in decline for a man in decline. Yes, ma'am.
Following up on Ted Cruz's comments, I've seen some pushback to not even calling January 6th a terrorist attack, but just an attack by itself from much of what I consider the base of the right. Are you worried that there are people who don't understand the severity of what happened as far as the violence on that day?
We're worried there are a lot of folks who don't understand the severity of what happened, particularly if it was so severe that it was being animated and encouraged by assets of the federal government. That would be a far greater scandal than anything that the Democrats have talked about or even that other Republicans have talked about. Congresswoman Greene and I have acknowledged from the very beginning of this day to our time out at the breach site that we oppose violence, that this was a violent day, that it was not a good day, it is not a day we are celebrating, and we condemn political violence in all of its forms, full stop.
So what is your message to the people that say, well, January 6th people just walked into the Capitol and took a look around?
I say we need to release the over 14,000 hours of videotape that the American taxpayers pay for. You know who pays for this building? The American taxpayers. They pay for those video surveillance cameras, and they own the footage. If there's nothing to hide, release it. We have constantly called for it to be released. We should release all of that video, and then America can judge for themselves. But another thing is, I think we need to remember the violent riots and the over 16,000 charges for the Antifa and BLM riots. Again, why don't riots against American citizens matter, but yet the riot on January 6th is the only thing that just reigns the discussion? Here's something for you all. What if the FBI was involved? What if Ray Epps and what he was doing, and this man that was on the scaffolding, and John Sullivan and other bad actors like them, what if that caused a member of the press to get killed? What would you all be saying about that? So what kind of responsibility would you be placing on the FBI or any kind of other federal agency if a member of the press had been killed that day because of violence that they had caused to action? I mean, I think this is a serious question. You all work here every single day, just like we do. You walk these halls. This is the place where you gather information and do your job. So your safety was also at risk that day too. And if our federal government was involved in doing so, I think that's something that you should be very upset about.
Congressman, can I ask, do you believe that the man who just got 5 years for throwing a fire extinguisher at a police officer was an undercover federal agent?
I'm sorry.
We're not familiar with that particular case.
Well, it's one of the cases that's just been settled. 5 years for throwing the fire extinguisher.
For throwing a fire extinguisher?
We're not here to
I'm
litigate
not in
any
their
particular
cases.
case.
Yes.
We're no one's lawyer. We're no one's advocate. We're here to speak to the conditions that existed on that day, to the civil rights of people who have been deprived access to medical care, religious services. But we're not going to get into the facts of any one particular defendant. We have brought video evidence to display to you in the world, and we think that those are the specific cases that would probably warrant the most thorough review.
Yes.
Well, right.
Yes,
that's
sir.
what I'm showing you. But you're here talking about a case that
I'm
that we weren't
unfamiliar
involved
with
in
it.
adjudicating.
Yes.
If Republicans take back the House, what kind of investigations might you launch involving this or any other sort of related issues?
Well, we're going to encourage Republican leadership to utilize the January 6th committee correctly to answer the questions regarding potential federal involvement. That goes to the top of the list. I am also heartened that Congressman Jim Jordan has publicly committed to starting an oversight and investigation subcommittee of the House Judiciary Committee, and I believe that that could foster some very productive work regarding what's happening at the FBI and DOJ and perhaps other federal entities that were involved on that day. Yes, sir.
You briefly mentioned Stuart Rhodes, the leader of the Oath Keepers. What is your current opinion of the Oath Keepers and their role in the breach?
I think it's something that warrants a good deal of review, but it's very suspicious to us that Stuart Rhodes is sort of like the Forrest Gump of a lot of these operations. He appears in strange circumstances, is involved in organizing activity, and then seems to always escape any specific charge or accountability. And it beckons the question whether or not Stuart Rhodes is in fact a federal asset or informant. And we would like a direct answer to that question. I mean, Ray Epps and Stuart Rhodes were part of the same organization. The Epps video is very compelling, and we think the Rhodes case is also warranting a further inquiry. Yes, sir, Brian?
As we sit here right now, what is the next step for the January 6th detainees? What does the future look like for those guys?
Well, I encourage everyone to go to green.house.gov. Green has an E on the end. That is where you can read the D.C. jail report that we worked very hard to get the information out on what's happening and how these people's due process rights are being violated. But it's also about the entire D.C. jail. The D.C. jail has quite a history of being just a terrible place, treating prisoners badly. Well before January 6th, pretrial detainees or defendants are being held there. Going forward, no one is defending these people. They are languishing in jail. They're awaiting their trials. Many of their trials are much later on. So unfortunately, it's a very sad case until more attention is being drawn to it and until more people care to step in and help. And I really honestly hope they do.
What do you say to those who say that these are just further conspiracy theories about the FBI being involved, that you've been spreading about the election in order to fundraise money? Because you both have.
Well, I mean, I'm familiar
with
being,
like Russian collusion?
Yeah, I'm familiar with being called a conspiracy theorist because when I got here in 2017 and in 2018, when I was making the claim, oftentimes alone, that it wasn't Trump colluding with Russia, it was in fact the Clinton apparatus and the DNC that was colluding with Russians to tell lies about Trump. Oh, everybody said I was a big conspiracy theorist then, but now we're starting to see through the Durham indictments that is precisely what happened. So kind of the arc of the DC narrative is first y'all call me a conspiracy theorist, and then months and years later, these things turn out to be true. Because I expected that criticism, we brought evidence. We brought video. And I would say, send it to the critics. Send it to all the folks who produce the mainstream media primetime shows. You know, they want to run a whole lot of video from January 6th, but I'm willing to bet you won't see these videos run on primetime, and they should be, because it shows the American people that there was a lot more going on and that the game you're watching is not the game being played. We'll do one more question, and then
he had his hand up.
Okay, sure.
I have a question about President Trump. So you all are making the case here that, in your words, this was a Fed insurrection, some sort of federally instigated event. Correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I know, that is not the case that President Trump himself makes about this. He, sees this as an outpouring of support from his followers. and says that the real insurrection was on November 3rd. I haven't seen him make the argument that this was some sort of federally instigated thing.
We're not only limited to the arguments that former President Trump makes. We're entitled to make our own
arguments, yes.
Why should they believe you and not former President Trump?
Believe the evidence.
I don't think it's one or the other. I think that's the wrong premise to take here. You know, we were both really looking forward to President Trump's press conference tonight. Unfortunately, I think he got some bad advice in canceling it. We wish that he had done that so that people could have asked him these questions. But just like Congressman Gaetz just said, as members of Congress and representatives, we are going to be asking our own questions, and we don't have to fall in line behind anyone in the types of questions we're asking.
Yeah. We don't talk about our conversations with the president with you guys in any circumstance.
Yep.
You right?
Thank you,
guys.
everyone.
Thank you.
This is going to fall.
All right, everyone. Well, I just happened to stumble across that little interview or whatever you would like to call that. I thought we would put that up on the screen. Caught pretty much the tail end of it. I wasn't aware that it was going on. Yeah, so we will see what else is going on. As of right now, I don't have anything else to put on the screen. So we're going to go ahead and shut this live down, but we will probably be live again today. I'm sure there'll be more activity. Everybody's all excited, you know, happy J6 and all that. Either way, thank you guys so much for being here. I appreciate all of you. Big shout out to everyone that made donations, joined the membership program, or purchased any merch. I appreciate all of you, and I wouldn't be able to do this without you. So thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next live. Until then, stand tall, shine bright, and that's a wrap.